I want to start just with a quick announcement, or like kind of informationally. We've been holding this kind of prayer project together of the property next door. I mentioned to you that they knocked down the fence between our property and that, and we were all like, oh gosh, what a beautiful space. And just asking that question, is this something that God might have for our church? Is this sort of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us? And so we've just been leaning into it, praying a lot about it, keeping that conversation open. We had a meeting last week where we kind of walked through the property and were able to pray and extended kind of that offer to anybody, and have had a couple people say they are interested in contributing. And our whole thing with that has been, we've got to get all the way there before we say yes. I was taught this as a kid. Hudson Taylor was this missionary in China, and he would say, God's work done in God's way will not lack God's supply. And so we've come into this with a posture of discernment to just go, God, if this is something that you're doing, would you provide? And so anyway, if that stirs, we've got a paper in the back with some details on that Steve put together. And if you just want to pray with us, we would covet your prayers. If that's something that you feel like maybe is stirring a bit, grab that, look through that, and let us know. And in the end, we'll just continue to lean into the work that God's calling us to do. Amen? So anyway, thanks for that. Appreciate you guys. Today we are getting back into our study through Philippians. And I was saying in the first service, I had mentioned a few weeks ago as we got into chapter 2, that like if you kind of had this opportunity, like on a desert island, you can just like rip one page out of Scripture and that's the only one you get to take with you, that the first part of Philippians 2 is maybe one of those pages that you would tear out and go, this is it. Like the gospel is right there, right? The essence of following Jesus on this path of humility towards the cross, leading to resurrection and ultimately to glory. It's just this beautiful passage that even was turned into a hymn that they would sing. Now, as you kind of get all the way to chapter 19, we get to this place in this letter that this is probably the last page you'd pick. It's travel plans. It's like an itinerary part in here. We were reminded this is a letter that Paul is writing, and it involved some kind of practical details. And as we get to this passage, you might think like, oh, well, maybe we can like fast forward through it. But the truth is, as you study through this, you see two examples that Paul is holding up to us to consider. Titus, and then this other guy who we don't really, or not Titus, Timothy, and this other guy, Epaphroditus. And with these, we see Paul holding up kind of two model students of what he's been talking about. It reminded me of when I did my doctorate. On the web page there, they had this link that you could click for a sample dissertation. And I remember going to that and clicking it and going like, oh, this is going to be hard, right? They held up somebody, this is one of the former students, this is their work. And you kind of thought, oh, wow, this is where the bar is set. But you're reminded of something as well with that not only is there this high bar, but there's also faculty that's sitting there going, you can do this. This is the kind of work that you're capable of. And really, I think what we see in our passage today as we look at the lives of these two, as they kind of intersect with Paul's journey, is he's going to point to them and he's going to go, what is happening in their lives is something incredible, and yet something that is available for every single one of us here. A calling that Paul is saying, as hard as it is, every one of you is capable of living into. And so we get this picture of what success looks like in the kingdom of God. A success that's different than how we typically define success. It's challenging us to consider this in a totally different way. And yet at the heart of it, Paul is saying, this is the superior way. This is the better way. We've talked about in chapter 1, there's this beautiful prayer that Paul prays for the Philippians. And I've been reading it kind of each week, but to me it captures Paul's heart for each one that would be listening to this and hearing it. He was picturing this church in Philippi. I don't know if he even imagined that several thousand years later we'd be reading this here in Laguna Beach, but here we are. This prayer I think Paul would pray over us today. And it's verses 9 through 11 of chapter 1, and it says this: I pray this, that your love will keep on growing in knowledge and every kind of discernment, so that you may approve the things that are superior and may be pure and blameless in the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. That your heart might know and discern the superior way. This is Paul's heart for each one of you, that you would live a superior life. And if you're like me, you're thinking, like, compared to who? Superior to who? Is he calling us to be the brightest student in the class? And the truth is, as Paul fleshes this out, he's actually saying this is not a competitive goal against others. It's not something that you're comparing yourself to the person next to you going, am I living in the superior way? It's actually saying there is a way that we're naturally drawn to, and then there's a better way. There's a way, as Proverbs might say, that seems right to us but leads to death. This way of self, this way of control, this way of accumulation and possession and prestige. And Paul's going, that's actually not the way to success. That actually leads us into this place of self-enslavement. There's a superior way. And it's this way, as we see, that Paul describes as emptying of ourself. Laying aside those ambitions that are sort of self-congratulatory and living our life in a way that brings honor and glory, not to ourselves, but to God. This superior way is something that, as it turns out, we're all accountable to. Life, we would like to think, is just sort of up to us. We get to navigate our way through and enjoy, and it's about like attaining the pleasures and enjoying the comforts. But what we find is Paul saying, oh no, like you need to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. There's a sobriety to this, that there's an accountability, that we're responsible for how we live our lives. Are we living it in the best way? This idea that at the end of our life, we actually get our report card, right? And we get to see how we did. My little humble brag here, but my daughter Mia got straight A's this semester, and it was like the hard one, right? Junior year engineering, and she texted me and said, "Dad, I got straight A's." And I was like, "That's my girl." And then she responded underneath it, "Easy." It was not. I mean, she's been living at home this year, and I've watched her day in and day out. This is the brutal year for engineering. And to see her show up with such grit, come away from test after test after test and fight her way through it. And Paul, as he casts this bar for us, as he's kind of our professor, maybe our coach in this, he's challenging us to something, but he's reminding us it's hard. This superior way, it's not enough to just go, oh yeah, it sounds great. He's going like, it takes so much discipline. It's about a way that we live daily in our lives, so that our lives are manifesting what he calls this fruit of righteousness. If there's some sort of report card there, it's going to have to do with that. The fruit that is born from a life that is lived in this superior way. And when Paul describes that in Galatians 5, these are verses we're so familiar with, but he says this: the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Like, what's the rubric for the class? What is God looking for? He's looking for fruit. What kind of fruit? That kind of fruit. That if we live our life according to what he's describing as the superior way, this is what starts to show up in our hearts naturally. Now, if you look at that list, you're going, oh yeah, you see what he's saying. Are these the things that naturally arise up in our hearts? Well, no, probably not. We talked about last week the way that grumbling comes up, the way gossip comes up, the way negativity has this way of just sort of festering in our hearts. And now Paul's saying, get rid of that stuff at all costs. Rid yourself of that and instead create this room and this space that you would be responding in love, growing in love, more peace, increased kindness. That as we live this life daily, as we follow after Jesus, our lives will become more and more and more like his. There's a book that came out a few years ago that's made a splash called Atomic Habits. Has anybody read this book? And James Clear, he's got this great line from there. He says, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And this is what Paul is saying. This is happening automatically. Every decision you're making is sort of this vote for the kind of person you want to be. Paul is saying, choose this, the superior way of Jesus. Follow in it, but take each day as an opportunity to build habits in that direction. As you do, your life will change. It will be formed. I've been doing this program with Raya I told you about. It's called Grow, and it's this way of paying attention to just the real basic elements of your life, like how much water do I drink? Am I making sure that I get movement in every day? Am I sleeping the right amount? Am I keeping electronics out of my room so it's not interrupting and wrecking my sleep? Am I paying attention to my breath? And it takes this discipline. It's just not natural. And it's interesting as you kind of set this structure for yourself, you realize just how quickly you reach for something that's actually just a comfort that's not good for you, right? Like that handful of chips. Every time you're like, oh, I feel sort of lonely, so I think I'll just eat chips. And all these little habits in your life, right? That you're things that just wreck your sleep and keep those things from happening. To pay attention to these things, it goes from being sort of a novelty to all of a sudden finding a rhythm. And I was just thinking that this morning. I woke up and I'm like, gosh, when I drink enough water and go to bed early, I feel great in the morning. What a concept. But how it frees you up for your day, creates creative energy. You kind of go into the day with perspective. And thinking about this, in some ways, Paul is just saying, spiritually speaking, you need to pay attention to your life. The things you dwell on, the words that come out of your mouth, the way that you behave, the relationships you're in, all of these things you need to pay attention to. And if we're wondering, well, then how do I live? He's going to say, well, here's your example. Here's your model. Just follow Jesus. And for him at the beginning of chapter 2, he goes, that's it. Just think the way he did, right? Just take his actions and model yourself out. Peter's going to say, just follow in Jesus' steps. Which means we have to pay attention to what Jesus said, to what he did, to how he lived his life. To notice those things and then find ourselves asking that question. Well, what would Jesus do if he was in this situation? And Paul's going to point out, it's so often the very opposite of our inclinations. Jesus' response is going to be one of humility over and over again. Sacrificial love, considering others more important than himself. Laying his life down for the sake of others. Jesus becomes our picture of what this looks like. But he doesn't just stop there. He goes on and he gives us a counterexample. This is what it looks like. It looks like Jesus. This is what it doesn't look like. Like the tribe of Israel in the desert grumbling. Last week we talked about this. That Paul's like, if there's one thing to cut out of your life, one thing to just get rid of all of it, is grumbling. We need to be grumbling free. How do we cut grumbling out of our life? And so many of you responded and just texted little emails this week going, oh, I had no idea how much I grumble. Well, this is good, right? This is good information for us. A chance for us to notice the habits. It's too easy for me to come out with something critical, something that draws my heart and mind in the wrong direction. The opposite of this humility is seen in this constant complaining, grumbling, gosh, poor me. And today, Paul's going to give us two more examples. As he goes through this kind of travel itinerary of what's taking place, we're reminded of the context of what's going on in Paul's life, and we'll talk about that. But he's going to mention these two guys. And what I love is one of them is young. So if you're sitting here and you're late teens, early 20s, you're like, hey, this is a great example that one of the people that Paul's going to point to and go, be like this guy, happens to be really young. The other one is just another guy in the church. Nobody special, nobody with any sort of title, just a guy who was willing to raise his hand and say, I'd love to help. So these two guys, Timothy and Epaphroditus, we're going to look at them. We'll get a little bit more information about what's going on with Paul, and then kind of unpack this in some practical steps that we can take and learn from these guys. So here we go. Philippians 2, 19 through 30. Paul writes, "Now I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be encouraged by news about you. For I have no one else like-minded who will genuinely care about your interests. All seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know his proven character, because he served with me in the gospel ministry like a son with a father. Therefore, I hope to send him as soon as..." Oops, I lost my place. "Therefore, I hope to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. I'm confident in the Lord that I myself will also come soon, but I considered it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, as well as your messenger and minister to my need, since he has been longing for all of you and was distressed because you heard that he was sick. Indeed, he was so sick that he nearly died. However, God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. For this reason, I'm very eager to send him, so that you may rejoice again when you see him, and I may be less anxious. Therefore, welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and hold people like him in honor, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up what was lacking in your ministry to me." The word of the Lord. So again, we're reminded here that this isn't just some paper that Paul is writing theologically speaking, that there's actually a whole history and context to what's going on. Remember that Paul is writing this letter from prison. And Paul has had his life massively interrupted. In the last couple years, he shows up to Jerusalem and ends up getting falsely accused as being a troublemaker. In all of that, as the Roman soldiers step in, they find out he's a Roman citizen. And so he gets shipped out of there, put in kind of containment there and under this guy, Felix. And Felix is kind of fascinated with Paul, so he keeps him around instead of kind of sending him on where he should typically go. Felix develops a relationship, asks him all kinds of questions about his faith, and then eventually Felix is done and Festus takes his spot. And at that point, they're like, what do we do with this guy, Paul? Well, he's been accused of this thing by the people in Jerusalem, and they're like, but he's a Roman citizen, so Festus decides send him on to Rome. Surprise, surprise, during this time, Jesus comes in and goes, Paul, this is what I'm doing. I'm sending you to Rome. That this is going to create an opportunity for you to bring the gospel there and to speak it in front of the highest authorities, eventually in front of Nero himself. And so Paul is there in Rome and he's waiting desperately for this trial. He's hoping that he's almost there. You hear kind of the urgency, that he's hoping that he can get in there and be heard so that he's able to be set free. But in the meantime, Paul is there and he's uncared for. Unlike in today where you might get 3 meals in prison and this kind of thing, Paul has nobody caring for him. So this church in Philippi takes a collection and they send it onward. Epaphroditus will be the bearer of that gift. We also see that Timothy is there. And Timothy is like Paul's just beloved son. He cares so much for this guy. Timothy is somebody he met in this town of Lystra, who was a young believer. His mom was a Christian, even though his dad was not. And Timothy, even at that young age, had this kind of burning passion for God. And when he met Paul, he was like, can I come with you? I want to do what you do. And this is what happened. Paul welcomed him to travel with him. It's this real form of what discipleship looked like. That if you wanted to be a disciple, that meant that you actually travel with your rabbi, that you sought to emulate him in everything that he did. They would talk about having the dust of your rabbi on your clothes. You walked like that closely with him. They would follow each other around like in all areas, right? It was like this living in close proximity. And you see here Timothy still right by Paul's side, even in the midst of this. And Paul goes, this guy is special. Why? Because he doesn't look out for his own interests, but the interests of others. Now, if those verses sound familiar, it's because that's how he started the chapter. He's like, this is what I want you to do. Don't look out for your interests, but the interests of others. And he even goes on to say, except nobody does this, but he goes, but this guy does it. Timothy has that humility. And this is what you realize, that this sort of humility isn't just something that you attain at the end of your life. As a very young person, you can live your life in this way. Laying aside those ambitions and instead responding with this heart of openness. Paul calls him his son, and it's because Timothy is like training to do what Paul does. He's like, this job of yours, I want to do it someday. And Paul is investing everything in Timothy so that Timothy can then do this for others. We know that Timothy eventually becomes the pastor of the church in Ephesus, and it's like kind of a big deal. And he does it as a young guy. Paul's like, don't let anybody look down on your youthfulness, but rather set yourself an example for believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. He's calling Timothy to this high standard and saying, this is what it looks like. But all this stuff can be taught and trained, but what we see in him, more fundamental than that, is this humble heart that is teachable. It's amazing how fast we can grow when we're just willing to be led. So often we find ourselves wrestling and resisting what God is doing. But Timothy has just got this humble heart, and he's like, teach me. I was thinking, I led a cohort through George Fox, their seminary there this last couple years, and watched this one student, and in case he's listening, I'm not going to say who, but he was like, grew so much in this. And I'm going to tell you what, he was the last guy I expected it from. This person who I thought right off the bat, like, well, I'll just give it away. He had a hat that said, get off my lawn. And I was like, oh man, like this is going to be interesting. But this humble heart that was so teachable. And 2 years later, I was like, oh my gosh, like most improved. Like just hungry to grow, wanting to understand. And Timothy embodies this from a young age, and Paul's like, man, sky's the limit. Promotes him to a position where he can then exercise that authority properly. But he's going, Timothy, you need to be the kind of person that others can follow. So he says, you, therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that's in Christ Jesus. What you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, commit to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. This was Paul's whole strategy for evangelism, is like raise up people to do what you do. What a beautiful reminder for us as a church that that is what we are here to do. To raise up people that can step into those roles of ministry, and not vocational ministry, but just being a minister. Having that as a mindset, being examples, to mentor people, to become more like Christ. Like Paul will say, follow me as I follow Jesus. But to be taught and then to teach others. Our second example here is Epaphroditus. And interestingly enough, his name means devoted to Aphrodite. So it tells you something about his upbringing, right? He was named as like one devoted to this pagan god. And how ironic, as Paul's pointing out, this young man devoted to Aphrodite, who, as we see, has changed his allegiance and has devoted his life to Christ. And Epaphroditus is the one who's going to carry this gift of money all the way to Rome. And when you think about that, you're like, oh, that's kind. Like, you just got on a flight and was there in like an hour and a half or something. You're like, no. He went from Greece to Rome, which probably was about 800 miles. This would have taken him a few months. They raise up this money, and you can see them sitting there going like, who's going to take this? And Epaphroditus is like, I will. 800 miles by foot, partially by ship. He was going to arrive there probably months later. And he arrives there in Rome and he's sick, almost to the point of death. I mean, this journey would have been so risky. You think about like walking the entirety of the Camino, all the way from France to Santiago de Compostela is like 500 miles. Like this is another 300 miles. This would have taken him so long and at great peril and great risk. Places along that way that were so unsafe. Just the courage of this guy. And I love how Paul speaks of him. Who knows if Paul even knew him? Paul had been in Philippi and knew people in this church, so maybe he had met Epaphroditus. But now you see, as Paul refers to him, he has these words to describe him that are so affectionate. He's sending him back. He's saying, honor him. Honor Epaphroditus, my brother. And I love this about Paul, that these people that he was doing ministry with were like family to him, that there was this deep affection and intimacy that happened and was formed over this. To me, this is one of the gifts of being the church, that as we draw together, we get to be family with each other, brothers and sisters together. There's a way of doing relationship, that this superior way of Jesus, this way of humility and joining in the work that God has done, has given us a family that we're called to be in relationship with. There's a great proverb that says, one with many friends may be harmed, but there's a friend who stays closer than a brother. And whether or not Paul knew Epaphroditus beforehand, he certainly knows him now. Somebody that traveled this great length to just make sure that Paul is fed. That's it. By the way, there was like a church in Rome that wasn't caring for Paul. It was a church that probably was started during Pentecost, but one who still saw Paul as the bad guy. But these people in Philippi, they knew Paul, they loved Paul, and Epaphroditus is willing to travel almost to the point of death to reach him. And this shows us something about being the church and what the good life looks like, the superior way. Part of it is noticing people in need and just going and meeting that need, caring for people in that place of brokenness. As Paul's talking about, he's in this place of anxiety and sadness. His whole life has been interrupted. And while Paul claims to have gratitude and joy, we see here too that Paul encounters sadness, like fear of the unknown. And Epaphroditus becomes this incredible comfort for him. In fact, when he thought that Epaphroditus may die, he was saying, God, I don't know if I could bear it. God heals Epaphroditus, and he was like, that wasn't just for him. Paul says that was for me, so that I wouldn't have sadness upon sadness. These people that show up, it's a powerful thing. I was thinking in the first service, I sort of embarrassed Mary Blanton, but I think of her in so many ways like such a sister. And I think for me that like started when little Lila, she was still in the womb. Patty was on bed rest during that pregnancy because she had placenta previa. And they were very worried about her hemorrhaging. And so we were in this like really vulnerable place in that hospital room, just scared and unsure. And I just remember her showing up one morning kind of out of the blue and had brought like a little care package and a note and that kind of thing. But she like handed me a breakfast burrito. And I'm like, oh, it was like this holy moment, right? Like I still remember that. Why? Because I was like so scared and like in this place, and to have somebody come in and just care for you in that spot, to see you there like me. This isn't happening to me, it's happening indirectly, but here's Jeff afraid. She's like, here, Jeff, eat this. But I think I cherish that. And to realize these are simple things. When Paul's saying live in the superior way, it doesn't require some big degree. It doesn't require some huge title or some massive assignment. It's like just showing up in little ways or walking 800 miles like Epaphroditus. But these ways that we're called to show up and just be family for each other, to care for each other. He says, Epaphroditus, my brother, but then he says, my co-worker. And once again, we're reminded that this is work. That ministry is like no small thing. It's a challenge for all of us. It asks us to sacrifice in ways that feel costly, that take effort. But co-working is this way of linking arms with each other. It's this way of encouraging each other. When somebody kind of gets knocked down, you're like there for them. You're like, we've got this. How do we spur each other on? In Hebrews, it's going to say, let's not stop meeting together. Like we need each other to spur each other on to love and good works. As challenging as that is, it reminds us to show up and to show up together. He says, my brother, my coworker, and he says, a fellow soldier. And sometimes that work gets really hard. Sometimes that work means accusation. As I've said, like Paul certainly was, very familiar to this. He at one point had been a persecutor of the church, so he was suspected. People talked ill of him. People preferred other pastors to his teaching, all those kind of things. And he learned how to kind of endure this abuse. And then on top of that, shipwreck and beatings and all kinds of stuff that he worked his way through. But he wasn't alone. He had people alongside him through all of those things. Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a difficult time. Do you have any people in your life that you think of as fellow soldiers? I think of when we went through COVID and thinking on that elder team. There's something about that team of elders where it was like, you just endured something really, really hard. We went from meeting twice a month to meeting every single week. And you're looking at financials and okay, all right, just keep going, right? But I look back on that time and go, as hard as that was, there was relationships that were formed during that time. People that were in the trenches with you. And Paul is giving Epaphroditus these titles: my brother, my coworker, my fellow soldier. But as we see him modeling for this, the question could be asked, are you that for anybody? To whom are you a brother or sister? Who refers to you as a coworker for Christ? To whom have you been in the trenches of life with? Paul is saying this is the way of Jesus. This is the humble way. Join people in that place. It's a gift. It produces glory that is so meaningful. This is the thing your heart really hungers for. Not the acclamations, not the credit, but that inner sense of satisfaction of having been in the real stuff. He calls him a messenger, and Epaphroditus was literally that. He had carried a message all the way to Rome. He had brought this gift of encouragement to Paul, and now Paul was sending him home. Epaphroditus was longing to get home, and part of it was because they all heard that he was deathly sick, and he's like, I just can't wait to tell you guys, I'm fine. Paul's writing this in the letter, but Epaphroditus is going to show up with the letter. He would deliver what Paul's writing. And as he shows up, this reminder, right, that we're okay, Paul's okay. Paul hopes to come here soon. Timothy's coming shortly, which would have been a little bit of accountability for the church in Philippi. Paul's writing this because he's there is division in the church. There is these things that are broken, and he's telling them, stop doing those things. Oh, and by the way, Timothy's going to show up and make sure you're not doing those things. So this is what's going on. These are the two examples given here. A messenger and a minister and Epaphroditus. And this messenger to me is an assignment that to me he was literally fulfilling, but to me speaks to part of what all of us are called to be. Messengers of the gospel, bearers of good news. Paul writes in Romans, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Our lives become this message of hope to the world. And this doesn't require us to have some sort of official title to do so. We can just show up and be Christ. to live this out in such a way that it becomes tangible. I was talking to somebody in our church this week who works at Home Depot, and he was saying, man, people come in to Home Depot and they're so frustrated. They're like, where was that thing that was here last week? Or like, why has the price gone up on this thing? Or, and so you got these poor guys in the orange vests that are like, okay, well, dealing with this frustration, he's like, gosh, the way that we get spoken to is often pretty terrible. And he's like, I just see it as my opportunity to respond gently, to respond kindly, to practice patience. But what he said, and I loved this, is he's like, there's all these young employees that they're at Home Depot that are like, how do you do that? Right? They're like finding themselves getting so offended and frustrated, and they're looking at him going like, how do you keep responding softly? And the answer is, Kirk's like, well, I'm just trying to be like Jesus. That you can do that there in your Home Depot vest by responding gently. You're sending a message of what is more important in this life, a message of a sort of peace that passes understanding. To live this out, this way of Jesus, that becomes the message. And as we do, Paul says, we not only are messengers, but we're ministers. And ministry is not, I think it can be a misleading term. You're like, who does ministry here? You're like, well, Jeff and Greg and Philly and Travis. And we're the ministers, right? Wrong. This is really clear. There's a pastoral role, but the ministry role is for all believers. In fact, if you remember when we were going through Hebrews, it says you're all priests. You're all bearers of this blessing. Part of this role is you get called into this family of Abraham. It goes all the way back to this chosen race of people that are the bearers of the blessing. That's what it means to be chosen, is that you receive the blessing and you give it. That's your job as a minister. That's your job as a priest. Whatever your vocation, you are there to bring blessing. You are there to receive it from God and then to give it with generous hearts. A messenger and a minister. All of your prayers are powerful prayers. In the end, I always close our service with a blessing, but the truth is you have a heart that can bless others. You have to receive it, and then you can give it. All of you are commissioned to that. That's all of our job description. The superior way of Jesus is stepping into these roles with intentionality. These are Paul's kind of two model students that he holds up for us, but he reminds us that each one of us is capable of doing this. Why? Well, as we're working out our salvation with fear and trembling, he reminds us it's God at work in you. What we're doing is laying aside the selfishness that wants to control these things. We're surrendering to that. We're letting go of those things and then allowing God to do the work. We're not trying to appear to be the best versions of ourselves. We're letting God heal our soul so that we can then respond in a way similar to Christ. Each one of us can have this sort of heart that considers others as more important than ourselves. It just takes daily work. As we're told, we pick up our cross daily. We lay aside those things in us of selfishness and ambition and conceit. We lay those things down. And instead what we do is focus in that free space to pour that energy into meaningful tasks, maybe little acts of service that nobody sees. He's not here today, so I'll just point out, Eddie Kitchen puts the tables away every single Sunday. Did you know that? And it's not his job. He's not the table put awayer or whatever that title would be. He just does it every single Sunday. Takes the trash out after the meal. Like, who does that, right? Like, oh, Eddie. He's just like, hey, there's a need. I think I'll do that. And you go, those kind of works. Like, it may seem like a really small thing, but in heavenly metrics, that's the thing. Like, that's a big deal. That's doing something on a level that most of us don't see. But Paul's going like, set your eyes on those kind of things. Notice those kind of needs and then step into them. And maybe even do them in secret. aspects of love and sacrifice that are going to change the world. They're all around you. This is how we live it out. These are the daily practices. And as we do those things, the fruit starts to taste different, better, more loving, more gentle, more kind. I have some examples here. Well, some statements here about what success looks like. What is this way? How is it measured? And this is the first thing. Go back to that previous slide there. There you go. Thanks, Greg. Number one, real success is always relationally measured. I don't know about some of you, but I love kind of doing my own work, right? Like this is my assignment, this is my project. But the real thing, it always involves others. I mean, this is the gift of church, is that we get to practice this here. This becomes like our lab. That we get to do this work of relational ministry. It's caring for the least of these. It's noticing the needs of others. It's always done in this relational context. That the superior way of living is not about your accomplishments. It's about instead your way of being in relationship. That love is the greatest thing. And you can't do that on your own. It requires being in proximity with others. So if we want to live in the superior way, it's drawing us towards those in need, moving towards the fringes of where people are hurting or marginalized. How do we live our life in this way? It's relationally geared. It's also demonstrated over time. That the real results are proven over time. And that's, as Paul addresses Timothy, he has this compassion, but it's a compassion that's been proven. It's been demonstrated. We've seen it day in and day out. Man, I would love to have one good day and just have that be the example of Jeff's life, but that's not the way it works, right? You're not sitting there at your moment, your shining moment, but it's really about how you live each day in accordance with this. How you respond to the struggles of this day, how you meet others in their struggles. In Romans 5, it says, not only that, but we boast in our afflictions because we know that affliction produces endurance, proven character, hope. This hope will not disappoint us because God's love has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us. Proven character. This is the fruit. I think sometimes we think that our demonstration of Jesus is like having every theological question answered correctly. And I just go, I don't think this is really ultimately what Jesus is talking about. He cares about good theology, certainly. But he's going, do our lives look like Christ? Do our hearts look like Christ? Are we living in that same way? We're transformed into this by daily picking up our cross. Next one, true success is about collaboration, not individual accomplishment. Again, it's joining, linking arms. Too often, I think success is like our big idea or my bit of influence that I want to provide, that thing that I can offer here. And he's going, you look at Timothy, and Timothy's like, what can I do? How can I help? That sort of posture. As has been said before, it's amazing what you can get done when you don't care who gets the credit for it. Too often we're going, yeah, but where's my recognition? Where's that adoration? Where's that thing coming my way that gives me that pat on the back? And Paul's going, this better way, it's not about that. It's about linking arms. Who cares who gets the credit? Just pour your life into meaningful areas and you'll experience a freedom in that space. Not the burden of comparison, not the insecurities that come with trying to be better than the person next to you, but instead that freedom of emptying. And last, true success is all about finishing well. It's about completing this run. It's about endurance and all the way to the end. Paul's so clear, I haven't attained this thing. I'm pressing on. This reminder that the journey keeps going. I think poor Epaphroditus, he's got to go all the way back. 800 miles to Rome is only the halfway point. Hopefully he didn't get sick on the way home. But anyway, you realize it's this kind of marathon. But we travel together This is lived out amongst us. This is one of the greatest gifts, is getting to do life together in this, encouraging each other, pushing each other to keep going. Now, I've got some strategies here for how we can do this practically. And the first one is just simply this: to follow Christ, we must know Christ. Obvious, right? But you're like, yeah, just be like Jesus. And you're like, what does that mean? Well, go read what Jesus taught. I love how Travis has been teaching through the Sermon on the Mount. He's like, just go study the red letters. As Jesus is unpacking, this is how to live in God's kingdom. We need to be digesting that, letting it go deep into our souls, making that the way that we live. Living in this place of forgiveness, loving not just our friends, but our enemies. Meeting the needs of the poor, praying in secret, all these beautiful pictures of how Jesus lives, what he models. We need to know Jesus in order to live that out. My second point is just real practical, but find a good mentor. How many of you have a mentor? So go find that person. Go ask them. I feel like if I've done anything that's served me well in life, it's like chasing after people that I respect, pursuing them. Some of them are dead. C.S. Lewis is one of my mentors. Some of them I've never met. Eugene Peterson, Tim Keller. I've just seen them from a distance. Some I've shaken hands with but don't really know, like Dallas Willard. But I look at these people and I'm like, I want to do what you do. I want to live like you live. Seeking after those people that inspire you and you're like, oh, I want to love Jesus like that person does. Paul's saying, follow me as I follow Christ. Go find that person and pursue him. There's some gems in this room, by the way. People that you could meet over lunch and talk to. But pursue people, get coffee with them, buy them lunch, and pick their brain. There's some deep wells here. Number 3, choose diligence over ambition. This way of just being faithful. I love how Peter, when he's talking to young people, we got some young people in here today, he says, do this, humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God, so he may exalt you at the proper time. That glory is the path, but it's not something that we ever seek out for ourselves. What we do is we live in this place of openness, emptying, humility. And God has this way of pushing us into the opportunities when we're ready for them. God knows our hearts. He knows the brokenness there. I think he protects us oftentimes from that praise that would make us go veering off in the wrong direction. God's wisdom and his timing, that's what we want. Saying, in the meantime, just stay in that place of humble service. God will open up the opportunities. Dallas Willard, one of my favorite things that he wrote, and I've shared this before, is he gave this paper on how to get tenure at USC. People are like, what's the answer, right? Like, how do I get where you got? How do I be a philosophy professor at USC? And he's like, well, what I did is I just wrote these 2 papers and I did the best work I could and then I just trusted Jesus. Everyone's like, what? He's like, seriously, I just followed, God just opened all those doors. I never asked, I never pursued. And that isn't everybody's story. And certainly there are things that we have to pursue. But there's a beauty to that message, isn't there? Be diligent about the work. But all the strategic thinking to get yourself promoted, what if we let Jesus just take care of that stuff? Open up the doors when we're ready. Last thing, lean into the daily work and habits. There's just no substitute for this. Each day now I'm thinking, have I drank enough water? Am I getting to bed on time, right? These basic ways of living. But I think spiritually speaking, we need to be asking ourselves the same questions. Is my daily life building the habits that are helping me have a heart like Christ? Am I choosing those things that are going to build those patterns in my life that are going to make me bear the right kind of fruit? How do we scrutinize our lives? Because all of us are called to this. All of us are called to be a coworker and a brother, to be a soldier and a messenger, to be ministers of this gospel. And as we do, our lives change. I'm going to read something that I've read plenty of times, but it's one of my favorite things that Lewis wrote. And he's going to call the people that live in this way the new men. Paul would probably say these are the ones who are shining like the stars in the sky. And the way he describes this to me is just so beautifully put. So here, if you've heard me read it before, most of you, but he says, already the new men are dotted here and there all over the earth. Some, as I have admitted, are still hardly recognizable, but others can be recognized. Every now and then one meets them. Their very voices and faces are different from ours, stronger, quieter, happier, more radiant. They begin where most of us leave off. They are, I say, recognizable, but you must know what to look for. They will not be very like the idea of religious people, which you have formed from your general reading. They do not draw attention to themselves. You tend to think you're being kind to them when they are really being kind to you. They love you more than other men do, but they need you less. They will usually seem to have a lot of time. You will wonder where it comes from. When you've recognized one of them, you'll recognize the next one much more easily. And I strongly suspect, but how should I know, that they recognize one another immediately and infallibly across every barrier of color, sex, class, age, and even of creeds. In that way, to become holy is rather like joining a secret society. To put it at the very lowest, it must be great fun. To be free of all that striving, all that turmoil, all that like self-obsession, free to just live in this space of peace and of joy and of service, of compassion to others. This is the invitation. This is abundant life as Jesus defines it and models it and then asks us to follow. My questions for you. We're going to ditch the last song. I'm like so over. I'm so sorry, you guys. Questions for reflection. Spend some time this week evaluating how you would define true success. How well does it match the example given to us in Philippians? How do your daily actions match this definition? Is it congruent? Are you living according to the superior way that Paul's calling us to? Number 2, think of Paul's descriptions of Epaphroditus. Brother, coworker, soldier, messenger, minister. Which do you find most difficult? Ask God if there's one of those in particular that he wants you to grow in. Maybe just one for now. God, help me to be a good messenger. And number 3, do you have a goal to grow in service? What are some ways you could increase this priority in your daily life? To notice, to spot those in need, to step in and fill those gaps. Even if you do it in secret, this gives such joy, such meaning, such purpose to our lives. Would you stand with me? I pray that we go out here this week and we lean into this work. Would you do that with me? Glance at these questions. They're on your bulletin actually today. So take that bulletin. Corey prepares these beautiful bulletins, but take that with you. Look at those questions at some point this week. And I just pray that maybe even one of those would challenge you as you go. But as you leave, I pray God's blessing, that God would bless you and keep you, that he would make his face shine on you and be gracious to you, that he would lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Amen. Bless you guys.